Good afternoon to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our tropical weather video for today, June 27th, 2024. Today, we're going to be looking at Invest 95L in the deep tropics, as well as other areas to watch in this very unusually active June. Heading into early July, lots of activity that we're seeing now that is not very typical of this time of year, and it might get even more interesting as we head into early next week with the potential that we might see a hurricane threat for the southern Caribbean islands as we head into early next week. So let's see that with the National Hurricane Center homepage. Starting off, obviously, with two areas of interest in the Atlantic. First off, Invest 94L. This is one of the two areas we're watching, and this is located in the Caribbean. It only has a 30% chance of development over the next several days, and it'll most likely do so over the southern Gulf of Mexico and Bay of Campeche if it does develop. But it's definitely looking interesting, at least in terms of convective activity. It's really fired this morning, so maybe the chance is still there that it'll develop in the Gulf of Mexico. But regardless, 94 will probably be an impact no matter what in terms of heavy rains and flash flooding for Central America and Mexico once again. But the big talk of the town, the big concern that everybody has, and rightfully so, is Invest 95L. This is located in the MDR, the Eastern MDR to be exact, and that is very unusual for this time of year. We really don't typically see development in the Eastern MDR, but it's looking like it's going to happen this year. And this has a 70% chance of formation over the next 7 days. The National Hurricane Center is very confident that Invest 95L will potentially develop and become a tropical depression or tropical storm, as they literally say in their outlook, as this potentially targets the Windward Islands early next week. And we're going to take a look at that in more detail later on. But here's a satellite image of the two storms. You can see 94L. Lots of convective activity, although it's disorganized. There's no developed center yet with 94L, but as I mentioned, regardless, it'll be a concern when it comes to heavy rains and flash flooding for Central America. And of course, we're looking at potentially whether or not this could still try to do something or consolidate at least some while it's in the Bay of Campeche. And then on the other hand, we have Invest 95L, a very small tropical wave that is very compact in the Eastern Atlantic, and that's mainly the biggest theme of this system. Is probably going to be a very small system once it does develop, which could honestly swing it either way in terms of whether or not it becomes a strong system or not. A lot of the models actually think that this system might actually be strong, and it's just a testament to how favorable atmospherically we are this year, how favorable the atmosphere is for potentially a very active hurricane season, because it is not very often that we see this kind of development occur in the MDR on a calendar day that is June 27th. This is not August 27th or not even July, late July that we're looking at this. It is late June. And the MDR is very, very warm on top of that as well. So this has an unusually favorable atmospheric state and also a very unusually warm oceanic state ahead of it as well, and that's just going to work in its favor. And really quickly, a closer look at 95L, you could see it's already spinning. As I mentioned, it's a small storm. There's already a compact area of vorticity associated with this storm, so it definitely has the energy to spin up or to work with in order for this storm to spin up. There's also persistent convection associated with this storm too. It's going to be really interesting, though, to see how much it's able to persist, especially since it does have Saharan air, which is just to the north. And obviously that is something to be expected, given it is, after all, just the early part of the hurricane season. We're not even into July yet, and we're looking at a storm like this on the longitude 35 west, and that is all the way, once again, in the Eastern Atlantic. And you could also see that too, this tropical wave represented in the total precipitable water map. you could actually see the spinning motion associated with this. So this represents there's definitely energy associated with this wave, enough so that it's going to take advantage of it, that it'll probably develop over the next day or so in the MDR. And then really quickly, you could also see Invest 94L as well in the Caribbean. Lots of moisture associated with 94L, probably why I was able to really blow up in convection this morning, if you saw. And that obviously will bring heavy rain and flash flooding once again to Central America, regardless of whether or not it will develop. But as I said, this is really being fueled by a very, very favorable Atlantic we have this year. This is the sea surface temperature anomaly map in the Atlantic. And just notice all of these anomalies right through the deep tropics, and right through where Invest 95L is too. I think it's roughly right located in here somewhere, the southern MDR. And it's sitting right over water temperatures that are easily a degree, even 2 degrees Celsius above normal, and throughout its track, probably because most of the models think, and I'll show you the actual track in just a moment, but in general, its track will generally be through the southern MDR into the Caribbean. And honestly, we don't even need to look at just specifically the MDR. We could just take a look at the MDR and the Caribbean as a whole, and even the Gulf of Mexico. Remember when everybody was talking about it cooling down several days ago? Well, that has also rebounded too, just for your information. And it's also warm in the Bay of Campeche too as well. So the bottom line I'm trying to get at is that the oceans are very warm. It's fueling into this very, very favorable atmosphere we have. And especially directly ahead of 95L is where all these really warm sea surface temperature anomalies are located. And I'll just show you that really quickly in the actual track guidance of the models. This stays very low through the southern MDR into the southern Caribbean. And let's really quickly kind of guess where that is on the map. And it's generally right through this area. And there are solidly at least sea surface temperatures that are a degree to even 2 degrees Celsius above normal. So that's already 1+ working in favor of 95L. The other thing that's also very interesting is that if you actually take a look at the track guidance for 95L, you could also see lots of convergence on the idea that this storm will probably remain in the track that it's going. A lot of the models are in really huge agreement that this will be a storm that kind of rides the lower latitudes of the MDR, and probably be an impact for the southern Windward Islands heading into early next week. The biggest uncertainty that I think that is to be pointed out with 95L at this time is mainly in terms of its speed, and that also goes into its intensity too. That's the biggest thing that the models are disagreeing at right now. You could actually see with these small numbers here, that represents the time frame that these plots are at. We have some models that have it already in the Central Caribbean almost by the time it's at 5 days, which is 120 hours out. And some of them have it only at 5 days, right, just entering the Eastern Caribbean. So that's the general disagreement that the models have right now. But it's really important and it's very significant that we're seeing all the models agree on a specific track right into the southern Caribbean. We don't have models that are all the way down south crashing into South America, or especially we don't have models that are all the way up here in the northern MDR taking this out to sea. No, they're all very certain on this going to the Caribbean, and that is what is especially important given that this is going right into the Caribbean islands where there is civilization and there's people that are potentially in the line of fire that could be caught in the crossfires with 95L. And I know that sounds dramatic, but you get what I mean. There is a general threat to land that is associated with 95L, and model agreements, especially when it comes to that, is very crucial. So let's actually take a look at the actual models now, starting off with the GFS. And I'm just going to really quickly put it on the 850 millibar vorticity. Take it out in time. You can see over the next day or so, 95L is definitely already close to developing into a tropical system. As I showed you, it is a very compact, small storm. And the GFS does indeed say that. Looks like it basically does form into a tropical system by tomorrow, so we'll probably already have Tropical Depression 2, I think, or even Tropical Storm Beryl by tomorrow. We'll have to see, though, exactly with intensity. But notice over the next several days. GFS, in line with all the track guidance, has huge ridge of high pressure over to the north of it, which is, I guess, the reason why all the models are agreeing with the fact that this is going to just move straight into the Caribbean. And then we see that happen right around late Monday, some of the models into early Tuesday. Again, that's an issue with the timing, but generally by early next week, it's either Monday or Tuesday. That's still part of early next week. This storm moves into the Caribbean, and then at hour 120, you can see there enters the Eastern Caribbean as of bona fide, probably a hurricane. Let's see what the MSLP is. 967 millibars. That is definitely a bona fide hurricane that the GFS has entering the Caribbean. Once again, just as a testament to how favorable atmospherically everything is in the Eastern MDR. And let's actually look at the upper level winds to show that as well. Starting off where it is right now, it's roughly located in there. Let's see the low pressure if it does form. But generally in the Eastern MDR, upper level winds are very light. They're very favorable. You notice how we have this huge sort of anticyclonic sort of motion here in the upper levels of the atmosphere. There's an upper level anticyclone that is situated right over 95L. And notice as we take it into time, right as it moves across the MDR, notice where all of this flow in the upper level is. It's all moving away from 95L. So there is outflow with this storm. And good outflow when it comes to a developing system means that the storm is able to breathe and is able to intensify. And if it's able to breathe over very warm, anomalously warm sea surface temperatures in the southern MDR, in the deep tropics in June, no wonder why the GFS really intensifies this. Look at that into the Caribbean. This is the 12Z. And let's actually zoom in a little bit on the tropical Atlantic. There you can see it. Well-defined outflow, especially on the eastern and northern portions of 95L. No wonder why it intensifies this very quickly as it heads into the Caribbean. And a lot of the models, in fact, most of them, actually intensify it pretty decently as it heads into the Caribbean. But then the concern then becomes, after the Caribbean, what does it do? But then what comes after 95L, not in terms of what the future for 95L is, but what could happen in terms of other systems, because look at what the GFS does. After it moves into the Caribbean, hour 102, so roughly 4 to 5 days from now, look at that. The GFS is developing another system right behind 95L. Really not typical for June, and I don't know what's going on with the Atlantic, but I guess since we've been talking about really active hurricane season this year, we're now starting to see it actually play out in real time, and the GFS is showing that indeed, look at that, we have another system developing, and then that too kind of not really as strong as past runs of the GFS. Let's go back to the 6C. The 6C had it actually a lot more as a bona fide system moving into the islands, but that's still something. GFS, the bottom line is that we have this storm that moves into the islands and that moves out, and then we have potentially another threat. I think the biggest thing to highlight is that, as I expected and as I've been showing you for the last several days, we expected that this portion of June, late June into early July, would get active, and now it seems like the models are starting to pick up on it. And it seems a little bit unrealistic that you would expect a second storm right on the heels of a first storm in late June and early July to develop in the MDR. But as I once again said, if the atmosphere is as favorable as it is, that the GFS is amplifying and intensifying 95L the way it is right now, I guess you could say that it is, no, I don't want to do that, but I guess you could say that it is possible that we could get something else behind it too. And I think one thing else we could really look at is the relative humidity with this storm, the moisture that 95L kind of keeps itself in. Because notice there's a lot of dry air to the north of both 95L and of this wave behind 95L, which might be something we need to talk about in a few days. But the biggest thing, as I mentioned, is that 95L stays a very small, compact storm. And I guess because it uses the environment from it has over top of it, but it also has very warm sea surface temperatures below it. It's able to keep its moisture bubble, and it's able to fight back against the more typical part of late June and early July, which is all of the Saharan air, which is to the north. Maybe that might actually have a much bigger impact on this wave that is behind 95L as it moves into the Caribbean. You can probably see, yeah, some Saharan air probably does try to wrap into it. So that's why it doesn't really do much. But at bottom line, what I'm trying to say is atmospherically, all systems are a go. As people say, all systems are a go with 95L. And if this is able to play its cards right, just like the models are showing that it might indeed do so, we might have a hurricane impact potentially for the Caribbean islands as we head into early next week. And really quickly, don't want to really completely ignore it. We also have 94L in the Atlantic right now. The GFS not really doing much with it, but you can actually see on the 12Z run, it does try to consolidate 94L a little bit as it heads into the Bay of Campeche. It only has around the next 3 or 4 days or so. It kind of moves inland after that, and that is the end of that with 94L as it moves into Mexico by the time we get to Sunday night, early Monday morning. So that is the situation with that. But regardless, I want to show you once again with the moisture. 94L is going to pack lots of moisture with it. Look at that. Lots of moisture in the Bay of Campeche, into Mexico, and even some moisture getting its way into southern Texas once again. So heavy rainfall, flash flooding, those kind of impacts that you all know all too well with 94L will probably be an issue regardless of whether or not it develops. But the main concern is really being placed on 95L right now. And I think this is also really well represented in the intensity guidance. This is it for the 12Z run of the intensity guidance for 95L. You would expect that sometimes the GFS would tend to overdoing these storms. Especially, we would hope that the HWRF is overdoing it. But actually, if you saw, I did actually tweet about this on Twitter earlier today. But all of the hurricane models basically are intensifying this into a hurricane, which is a little bit questionable because the hurricane models sometimes tend to overdo the intensity of especially small, compact, early season storms like we're seeing right now with 95L in the MDR. But the fact that we have the global models like the GFS as well, in very solid on this potentially becoming a hurricane, and just notice where the general model guidance is in terms of the intensity. Yeah, we have a few intensity members or whatever these models are that don't intensify this into a hurricane, but just count the member model guidance plots that we have here, and you notice the majority of them, more likely than not, do make this into a hurricane. So it is definitely interesting, and it is quite alarming that the models are as aggressive as they are with 95L right now, especially since the fact that it's still not even developed yet, and they are very aggressive, and they might be onto something. We'll have to wait and see. But really quickly before I end things off with 94L, don't want to completely take the light away from 94L because I think it still has a chance. Most of the models, obviously, because there's not really much certainty with 94L, it probably won't develop, although I still say there is a chance that it could. But you can see with the intensity guidance, the GFS actually does try to, because the AVNI, this is the GFS model, if you're not aware, by the way, maybe it does try to make it into a tropical storm a little bit over the next several days, or over with the time that it does have. Maybe the GFS does try to do something with it. And then there's the SHIPS model as well, which might be overdoing it. The SHIPS model sometimes is not always the best with these kind of systems. I think the SHIPS model is really only a model people look at when a storm is already developed, at least in terms of the intensity aspect of it. The SHIPS model is a good model when we're taking a look at statistical or the general probability of things being favorable for storms. And I actually think I might bring up the SHIPS model tomorrow for 95L, especially if it's already developed into a system by then. But the ships does try to do something, and I guess there are also other model ensembles as well that try to do something with 94L. Although I'm not actually sure if this is even when 94L is still an entity in the Atlantic. Bottom line, the concern is really being placed on 95L right now, obviously because it is threatening the Caribbean, and we'll have to see what it does over the next several days, because I know there's then going to be a lot of questions surrounding how it impacts not only the Caribbean, but places that'll be impacted after this hits the southern Caribbean islands. That includes places like the Gulf Coast or even other parts of the Caribbean. But at that point, we start getting well beyond our safe 5-day, 120-hour time zone when it comes to tracking, and you obviously know the deal. At that point, all we could really say is we'll have to wait and see. Certainly, though, we'll have a lot of waiting and seeing to do though over the next several days, as once again we remain busy with the tropics, with 95L and even 94L, or even this potential other system that the GFS is trying to hint at. Behind 95L too, which might be something that we might need to start talking about soon, or at least soon enough in the next 2 or 3 days or so. Obviously, if the models are still showing it, but I don't want to get too caught up on everything. So obviously, it's very easy to get very caught up on everything that you see, especially if it's very fearful or very hyped. And I really don't want to try to do that. So let's just focus on 95L right now and what 95L does over the next several days. And with that being said, I always encourage, if you like what you saw today, especially if what you saw today was informative to you, I would really encourage if you give a like to this video and share it with other people as well, especially if you know people in the Southern Windward Islands and you think that this will be a useful sort of information video for them. I would really appreciate it, not only for me, but also for other people as well, because it's always important that we have everybody monitoring the tropics, especially when there is a very real threat like 95L looks like it could be. So really hope you do that. Also, if you also have any questions or comments or concerns, leave them in the comment section, and I will try to answer them as quickly as possible as well. With that being said, stay safe, have a great day, a blessed day, peace, love, and kindness to you all, and we'll talk again tomorrow.